Every year I get my calendar and say, now when am I going to Gatlinburg? So it's a pleasure.
Through the ups and downs of the year, a high point for Reba Williams is her traditional trip to Westgate Resort. The same trip she made in November 2016. When hurricane-force winds fanned ferocious flames through Gatlinburg.
Got knocked on our door and we didn't know it was an emergency. Got on the elevator. It went down half a floor and the power went out. I started calling 911 and they would say, well, we're sending somebody to get you.
After that first call at around 8 o'clock at night, Reba and her husband waited and waited. Called 911 a few more times, but nobody showed up.
The roads were blocked. About 3:30, we saw a red glow at the bottom of the elevator. We're not going to make it out. So then I tried 911 one more time.
911, where's your emergency?
The elevator's on fire. We're burning.
Where are you, ma'am?
Please send help.
Where are you, ma'am?
Westgate Resort.
He said, get to the lowest point in the elevator.
You gotta go that way.
The lowest point for the dispatcher was when he learned crews had tried and failed to reach them through a tangle of burning trees and power lines for 8 hours.
Reba, how long have y'all been in the elevator? You just got in it right before you called?
Since 8 p.m.
You've been in the elevator since 8 p.m.?
Yes.
They're getting closer, Reba. I'm still here with you, okay?
Of course, he kept saying somebody's coming, but I thought, it's like you tell your children it's going to be okay, it's going to be okay, and when it's really not.
Just pray.
They're on their way as fast as they can get there, okay?
With a fiery hell creeping up from below, Reba and her husband made plans for above.
We said our goodbyes to each other and said, see you in heaven. We knew that was the end. I passed out. I saw Jesus in the white light. And about that time, I heard somebody say, ma'am, you've got to stand up.
Fire crews pried the elevator open, rescued her husband, and carried an unconscious Reba down 3 flights of fiery stairs.
We have located and rescued both people in the elevator. EMS is on the scene.
And the next thing I remember, I was in the ambulance to Knoxville, to the trauma unit.
Williams and her husband recovered from burns and smoke inhalation. After the fire, the only thing left standing of the building where she was trapped was the elevator shaft. And they're forever grateful to the rescue workers and the Westgate staff who took care of them.
You know, it's people and relationships that count.
And they'll keep coming back to Gatlinburg, because after a night when they would not go down, the highs of the Smokies feel even closer to heaven.
I'm a walking, talking miracle that I should not have come out of that alive. But I did.
With reporter Madison Stacy in Gatlinburg, Jim Matheny, WBIR 10 News. Trot through this neighborhood in East Knoxville, and the houses hide the history of a time when real horsepower was off to the races.
When you mention it, how it's an oval, then people say, oh, I see. And I get that many times.
The man who owned the track that's now the Speedway Circle neighborhood was the ultimate underdog.
Cal Johnson, coming up from slavery to be one of the wealthiest black men in the state of Tennessee, is just a fascinating story.
Cal Johnson was born a slave of the McClung family in 1844. As a young boy, he worked on the farm and became an expert horseman, just like his dad.
His father, Cupid Johnson, was a winning jockey himself. So horse racing was in Cal Johnson's DNA.
After the Civil War, Johnson bought horses, not for racing, but to pull wagons when he found work digging through death.
He got a federal contract to dig up the bodies of soldiers who'd been killed in the war. And he used that money to open several saloons in downtown Knoxville.
Cal Johnson opened the Poplar Log Saloon at the corner of Vine and Gay Street. He served blacks and whites, was known as a polite and respectable man.
Well, it was Cal Johnson's nature to be a gentleman.
Johnson's Tavern eventually changed its name to the Lone Tree Saloon because it had the only tree left on Gay Street. Money was growing on trees for Johnson with his saloons and real estate. He could afford to buy the animals he adored as a child.
He owned one of the finest strings of racehorses in the South. He owned the mare Lynette, the horse George Condit, won in the Chicago World's Fair.
Then Johnson bought the finest tracks for them to race in East Tennessee.
He purchased what became Speedway Circle from the East Tennessee Fair Association.
The tracks held horse races and even the first airplane flight in Knoxville. Johnson was a man so respected, voters elected him to city council. But his string of success at business was saddled after a tough turn of the century. In 1907, Tennessee banned gambling on horse races and also outlawed liquor.
Much of his income was destroyed by those two state laws. Thank goodness he had his real estate to fall back on.
Johnson continued making money on real estate and buying and selling fine racehorses, and he donated vast amounts of the money he made to charity. So much so, the city named a public park in his honor. When Johnson reached the finish line of life, he had no children. Most of his estate, worth $500,000, eventually went to the church.
So he was very civic-minded, gave his money to worthy causes.
The city park, a recreation center, and one of the buildings in downtown Knoxville still bears his name. And this remarkable story of a slave who found the fast track to big business left a lasting impression on the shape of a neighborhood at Speedway Circle.
That's the telling story for me from Cal Johnson, that I was a slave, but yet look at what I achieved. Look at what I contributed to my community.
In East Knoxville, Jim Matheny, WBIR 10 News.
So somebody's been up here.
If you need to track someone down, put retired Park Ranger Dwight McCarter on their trail.
You can tell that's mashed right there. It's several days old.
This expert man tracker filled a book with tales of search and rescues in the Great Smoky Mountains.
That was in '94.
McCarter says no stories have happier endings than finding lost children in the wilderness.
I tracked him. He called me Mr. Dwight. He's a sweet kid.
But the successful search methods used today were written on the empty pages of a story with no ending, even after half a century.
On June the 14th, '69, Dennis Martin disappeared off the face of the earth.
The Dennis Martin mystery begins with a Father's Day camping trip. This 6-year-old from Knoxville hiked a couple of days with his dad, grandpa, and older brother from Cades Cove up to the Appalachian Trail and over to Spence Field. On the hike, they met another family with 2 young boys, and the adults all sat together in the grass and watched the children play, and played along themselves when it was obvious the boys were huddled up and planning a prank on their parents.
They were going to sneak up and scare their family.
3 older boys went one way, Dennis went the other.
The older boys jumped out of the woods and booed the family and had a lot of fun. Dennis never showed up.
Dennis was only out of sight 3 minutes when his father, Bill Martin, started calling for him.
It so happened that a terrible weather front came in, so you have this soaring of wind. If a little child was hollering at you, that wind drowns it out.
As darkness fell on the mountain, so did a deluge of more than 2.5 inches of rain in just one night.
Cold, wet rain. And you can imagine what the little boy was going through. Where could he be?
The next day, searchers scoured the Smokies for Dennis, but the rain not only washed away clues, it made it hard to hear anything.
And you're going down streams, it's roaring. The rain obliterated everything, I'd say.
The Rangers were behind the 8 ball before they even arrived.
Deputy Superintendent Clay Jordan says any clues left after the rain were soon washed away in a flood of people with good intentions. From military special forces, rescue squads, to thousands of volunteers, more than 1,400 people a day saturated the area, many of them without any training.
The outpouring of love and support was just enormous. The problem is, as they were searching for this needle in the haystack, they were trampling clues.
We had a lot of people. Stomps down everything and muddies up the trail.
Searchers stampeded any chance for dogs to pick up a scent. And dozens of Boy Scouts who helped the first day covered the muddy terrain in child-sized footprints in every direction.
It don't work. It don't work. You've lost a child forever.
A number of rumors are making the rounds, some of them more popular than others, most of them based on far-fetched theory.
Did Dennis Martin fall off a cliff? Was he attacked by an animal? Kidnapped? Investigators followed countless leads for months, none of them leading to Dennis.
And if you think of the busiest national park in the country, someone is eventually bound to come across something with Dennis Martin. Well, there's a reason that's not the case. Take a look at all these trees. They weren't even here in 1969. This is where they were landing helicopters to help with the Dennis Martin search. And each year this forest grows, it buries the secrets of the Smokies.
Every year, nature layers up 1 inch of soil on top of that area.
You go to the end of the book to figure out what happened to Dennis Martin, and the pages are blank. It's the ultimate mystery.
Jordan says this story without an end was the beginning of a revolution in how searches are managed around the world.
So people got together and tried to figure out how could you have so many people looking for a lost boy and not be able to find him. That really launched the science of looking for somebody lost in the woods.
Searchers put a big emphasis on training and studying the psychology of how people in different situations behave when they're lost. And gone are the days of surrounding and drowning a search area with thousands of people.
It is better to have a smaller number of people who are trained to really look for those clues and not to damage other clues.
Experts filled the empty pages of Dennis Martin's story with lessons that continue to save countless lives.
Tens of thousands of people have been found.
Those happy outcomes may offer some solace, but never fill the void of a Great Smoky Mountain mystery that may never end.
I don't expect we'll ever really know exactly what happened to Dennis Martin.
It's a sad thing that we didn't find him. It tugs at your heart.
In the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Jim Matheny, WBIR 10 News.